Wealthy heiress mocks a dirt-covered farmer at a family wedding, only to discover 7 days later that he is the powerful entrepreneur leading the company her father wants as a business partner, forcing her to confront her pride and change who she is. Please subscribe my channel. Presley Hartman had never touched anything cheap in her life. Not her clothes. Not her car. Not the world she lived in. She grew up high above Atlanta in a luxury penthouse where the city lights stretched endlessly beyond glass walls. Every morning, she woke up surrounded by comfort most people could only imagine. Her father, Gordon Hartman, was one of the most respected businessmen in the Southeast. His name stood on office buildings, development projects, and company headquarters across multiple states. For Presley, wealth wasn't just something her family had. It was something she believed separated people. Over the years, she had quietly developed a habit of judging others before they ever spoke. Expensive clothes meant success. Luxury cars meant ambition. Powerful connections meant value. And anyone without those things? Well, she rarely paid attention long enough to find out. One Thursday evening, her father called her into his private study. The room smelled of leather-bound books and fresh coffee. Gordon sat behind his large wooden desk, reviewing documents. "Presley," he said without looking up, "we're heading to Mill Haven this weekend." She frowned immediately. Mill Haven. Your cousin's wedding. The excitement vanished from her face. Mill Haven was a small rural town nearly 4 hours from Atlanta. No luxury hotels. No upscale restaurants. No glamorous social scene. Nothing that interested her. "Dad, do I really have to go?" she asked. "It's family." That simple answer ended the discussion. 2 days later, Presley sat in the back seat of a black Escalade as the city skyline slowly disappeared behind them. Her two closest friends, Jade and Tori, had joined the trip. For the first hour they laughed and scrolled through their phones. But eventually the highways narrowed. Tall buildings disappeared. Open fields replaced busy streets. The farther they traveled, the less impressed Presley became. Small gas stations. Old barns. Long stretches of empty road. She stared out the window with obvious disappointment. "I don't understand how people choose to live like this." Then the driver slowed slightly as the road curved past a large field. Presley's eyes drifted toward the farmland. A young man was working alone beneath the afternoon sun. His jeans were covered with dirt. His faded gray shirt clung to his shoulders from sweat. He was dragging an irrigation line across rows of dry crops, focused entirely on his work. The heat looked unbearable. Yet he never stopped. Jade leaned toward the window. "Wow," she said. "He's probably been out there all day." Tori laughed softly. "Can you imagine doing that every single day?" Presley watched him for another moment. The man never glanced toward the road. Never looked up. Never seemed interested in who was passing by. Something about that annoyed her. She tilted her head slightly. "Some people are just built for that life, I guess." Her voice carried a quiet certainty. The certainty of someone who believed she already understood everything. The SUV continued down the road. Within seconds, the field disappeared behind them. And Presley forgot about the farmer completely. At least, she thought she did. Because sometimes the people we dismiss in a single moment become the people who change our lives forever. Moral: never judge a person's worth by the dirt on their clothes, because you cannot see the value hidden inside their character. Presley expected Mill Haven to be boring. What she did not expect was that one small moment on a country road would stay in her mind far longer than it should have. The black Escalade rolled slowly along the gravel road as the wedding venue came into view in the distance. Sunlight stretched across the open fields, painting everything in shades of gold. Then Presley saw him again. The same young man from the field. He was still working. His shirt was stained with dust. Sweat covered his forehead. His hands moved steadily as he adjusted an irrigation line running through rows of crops. Jade laughed quietly. "He's still out here." Tori shook her head. "That looks exhausting." Presley watched him for a few seconds. There was something strange about the way he worked.
No complaints. No frustration.
No sign that he wished he were somewhere else. He simply focused on what was in front of him. But Presley didn't see dedication. She saw limitation. Some people never leave places like this, she said with a small shrug. Her friends laughed. The young man never looked up. Not once. The SUV continued toward the wedding venue, leaving him behind in a cloud of dust. By evening, the entire property had transformed into a celebration. String lights hung from trees. Music floated through the warm air. Guests filled the lawn with laughter and conversation. Presley changed into an elegant white sundress that cost more than most people in Mill Haven earned in a month. She looked exactly like the world she came from. Polished. Perfect. Untouchable. Standing near the edge of the crowd with Jade and Tori, she scanned the guests around her. Then suddenly she froze. A familiar face appeared near the fence. The farmer. For a moment she almost didn't recognize him. His hair was neatly combed. He wore a simple white button-down shirt and dark jeans. Nothing expensive. Nothing flashy. Yet somehow he looked completely comfortable among everyone around him. He stood talking to an older gentleman, holding a cup of lemonade and smiling occasionally. Jade followed Presley's gaze. That's him, isn't it? The field guy, Presley replied. Tori smirked. You should go say hello. A playful smile appeared on Presley's face. Unfortunately, it wasn't a kind one. The three women walked toward him. When they stopped a few feet away, the young man turned calmly in their direction. Presley crossed her arms. Didn't I see you working in that field earlier today? He looked at her without speaking. She continued. You came straight from work? Jade and Tori giggled behind her. Presley tilted her head. You could have cleaned up a little more. It is a wedding, after all. For a second, silence filled the space between them. The farmer looked directly into her eyes.
No anger. No embarrassment.
No attempt to defend himself. Then something unexpected happened. He simply turned away. Without saying a single word. Without reacting at all. He returned to his conversation as though she didn't exist. Presley blinked. Her smile disappeared instantly. Did he just ignore me? Nobody ignored Presley Hartman. Not at business dinners. Not at social events. Not anywhere. Yet this stranger had dismissed her completely. And somehow that felt worse than being insulted. The laughter from her friends suddenly sounded awkward. An uncomfortable feeling settled in her chest. She quickly turned away. Whatever, she muttered. But for the rest of the evening, she couldn't stop thinking about him. Why hadn't he reacted? Why hadn't he cared what she thought? Sometimes silence says more than words ever can. And that silence followed Presley long after the music faded and the wedding ended. Moral: the people who need no approval often possess the strongest confidence of all. 7 days passed. For Presley Hartman, the wedding in Mill Haven had already become nothing more than an amusing story. Whenever she thought about it, she remembered the dusty roads, the endless farmland, and most of all, the farmer who had ignored her as if she were invisible. It still bothered her. Not because she cared about him, but because she wasn't used to being dismissed. Then on Monday morning, everything changed. Her father called her into his office at Hartman Holdings. The large glass windows overlooked downtown Atlanta, where skyscrapers stretched toward the clouds. Gordon Hartman sat behind his desk reviewing documents. When Presley entered, he looked up. I have an important assignment for you. She immediately straightened. Assignments from her father were rare. Important assignments were even rarer. We're negotiating a major infrastructure partnership, he explained. If this deal goes through, it will expand our reach across the entire Southeast. Presley's eyes brightened. Finally. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. I want you to represent us at Thursday's meeting. A smile appeared on her face. Really? Gordon nodded. You've been asking for more responsibility. Now you have it. The excitement filled her chest. This wasn't just another meeting. This was a chance to prove herself. Don't disappoint me, her father said quietly. I won't. Thursday arrived quickly. Presley spent hours preparing. Every detail mattered. Her presentation. Her notes. Her appearance. Everything had to be perfect. That morning she stepped out of her luxury apartment wearing a tailored designer suit and carrying a leather portfolio. She felt confident. Powerful. Ready. The meeting was scheduled inside one of Atlanta's most prestigious office towers. 20 floors of glass and steel rising above the city. As she approached the entrance, she paused briefly to gather herself. Then she noticed someone standing near the front doors. A man looking down at his phone. Dark jacket. Simple clothes. No expensive watch. No visible signs of wealth. At first, she barely looked at him. Then recognition hit her. The farmer. Her eyes widened. What are the chances? She laughed softly and walked toward him. The man looked up. The same calm eyes. The same expression. The same unsettling confidence. Presley folded her arms. You again. He said nothing. She smiled. Did you move to Atlanta? Still nothing. Her smile grew sharper. You know, this company isn't exactly hiring farmers. A nearby security guard shifted awkwardly. But Presley continued. Maybe try another entrance. They're probably hiring maintenance staff somewhere. The farmer simply slipped his phone into his pocket. Then he walked past her. Without responding. Without reacting. Exactly like he had at the wedding. For a moment she stood there annoyed. Then she followed him inside. The conference room was located on the 14th floor. When Presley entered, executives were already gathering around a long polished table. Everything looked exactly as she expected. Successful people. Serious discussions. Major decisions. This was her world. She took her seat and organized her notes. A few minutes later, the room suddenly became quiet. The door opened. Everyone turned. Conversations stopped instantly. A strange tension filled the room. Presley looked up and felt her stomach drop. The farmer had entered. But something was different. Very different. 2 senior executives followed behind him. Several people stood to greet him. Others nodded respectfully. No one questioned his presence. No one looked surprised. The farmer walked directly to the head of the table. The seat reserved for the most important person in the room. No. That's impossible. Presley's pulse began to race. Then he sat down. Opened a folder. Looked around the room. And spoke. Good morning, everyone. Let's begin. The voice was calm. Confident. Authoritative. The room listened instantly. An executive beside Presley leaned over and whispered quietly. That's Nolan Cruz. Her breath caught.
Nolan Cruz.
Founder. Zvo. Owner of one of the fastest-growing infrastructure companies in the country. The company her father desperately wanted as a partner. The company leading this entire negotiation. The farmer wasn't attending the meeting. He was running it. Suddenly every word she had spoken outside the building came rushing back. Every assumption. Every insult. Every judgment. And now the man she had mocked twice sat at the head of the table holding all the power. What happens when the person you look down on turns out to be standing far above you? As Nolan began presenting numbers and future plans, Presley barely heard a word. Because for the first time in her life, she realized how wrong she had been. And that realization hurt more than any humiliation she had ever experienced. Moral: the greatest mistake is believing you can measure a person's value by their appearance. The meeting ended, but Presley Hartman remained frozen in her chair. Around her, executives gathered their papers and exchanged handshakes. Conversations resumed. People smiled, discussed numbers, and made plans for the future. But Presley barely heard any of it. Her mind was trapped in a single moment. The dusty field. The wedding. The cruel comments. And the shocking realization that the man she had mocked was Nolan Cruz. A self-made entrepreneur. A respected CEO. A man whose success had been earned, not inherited. As the room slowly emptied, a heavy feeling settled inside her chest. For the first time in years, she wasn't embarrassed because she had failed. She was embarrassed because she had revealed who she really was. Across the room, Nolan spoke briefly with several executives before heading toward the exit. If she let him leave now, she knew she would regret it. Taking a deep breath, Presley stood. "Excuse me," she said to his assistant. "I need a few minutes with Mr. Cruz." The assistant checked her schedule. "His afternoon is full." "Please." The word came out softer than Presley expected. The assistant studied her expression for a moment before nodding. 2 minutes. A few minutes later, Presley found herself standing outside Nolan's office on the top floor. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls. The view was breathtaking. Normally, she would have admired it. Today, she barely noticed. When she entered, Nolan stood near the window with his back turned. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, he turned around. His expression was calm. Not angry. Not satisfied. Just calm. And somehow that made everything harder. "You wanted to see me?" he asked. Presley swallowed. She had rehearsed an apology in her head a dozen times. Now every word had disappeared. "I was wrong." The sentence hung in the air between them. Nolan remained silent. She continued. "At the wedding, and outside this building." Her voice trembled slightly. "I looked at you and decided I knew exactly who you were." She lowered her eyes briefly. "I judged you before you ever spoke." The office became very quiet. For a moment, Nolan simply watched her. Then he asked a question she wasn't expecting. "Why apologize now?" The question landed harder than any accusation. Why now? Because she had discovered he was successful? Because he was powerful? Because he was important? The truth frightened her. "I've been asking myself the same thing," she admitted. Then she looked directly at him. "Because I realized I wasn't seeing you." She paused. "I was seeing my own assumptions." Nolan nodded slowly. Not approving. Not forgiving. Simply listening. "This may be the first honest conversation I've had in years." The thought surprised even her. Nolan walked toward his desk and sat down. "When I was younger," he said, "people judged me all the time." Presley listened carefully. "My clothes. My hometown. The work I did." His voice remained steady. "For a while, I tried proving them wrong." He leaned back slightly. "Then I realized something." Presley waited. "I don't need strangers to understand my value." The words were simple. Yet they carried tremendous weight. Nolan looked directly at her. "You apologized. That's rare." A small spark of hope appeared inside her. Then his next words changed everything. "But real change isn't something you say." The hope paused. "It's something you live." Silence filled the office once again. What could she possibly say to that? Because deep down, she knew he was right. Anyone could apologize. Anyone could speak beautiful words. But becoming a different person? That required action. That required sacrifice. That required truth. For the first time in her life, Presley realized that changing her image and changing herself were not the same thing. After a long moment, she nodded. "Thank you." Nolan offered a small respectful nod in return. Nothing more.
No dramatic forgiveness.
No emotional speech. Just honesty. As Presley left the office and stepped into the elevator, she felt different. Not better. Not redeemed. Just awake. And sometimes, awakening is the first step toward becoming someone new. What if the hardest person to confront isn't someone else, but the person staring back at you in the mirror? Moral: true character is not proven by words, it is revealed through actions. The morning after her meeting with Nolan Cruz, Presley Hartman sat alone in her apartment overlooking Atlanta. The city below was waking up. Traffic moved through the streets. People rushed toward offices. Life continued exactly as it always had. But something inside her felt different. For days, Nolan's words echoed through her mind. Real change isn't something you say. It's something you live. The sentence followed her everywhere. At business lunches. At social events. Even during quiet moments before sleep. The truth was uncomfortable. For years, Presley had built her identity around appearances. The right clothes. The right people. The right image. But now she found herself asking a question she had never asked before. Who was she when nobody was impressed? One morning, she walked into her father's office carrying a folder. Gordon looked up from his desk. "What do you have there?" Presley sat down. "I want to start something." He raised an eyebrow. What kind of something? She opened the folder. Inside were plans, budgets, and community research reports. There are students in towns like Mill Haven who don't have access to tutors, college counseling, technology, or academic support. She took a breath. I want to create a foundation. Her father remained silent. I want to help them. For several seconds, Gordon simply studied his daughter. Then a small smile appeared. Not because of the proposal. Because of the person sitting in front of him. Are you serious? Presley nodded. Completely. Then I'll support you. And just like that, the first step began. Months passed. The Hartman Access Initiative launched across several rural counties. But unlike many wealthy founders, Presley refused to manage it from a comfortable office in Atlanta. She drove to the communities herself. Every week. Without fail. She sat in school libraries, community centers, church basements, anywhere there was room to help. She worked with students preparing for college entrance exams. She met parents struggling to afford opportunities for their children. She listened more than she spoke. And slowly, something remarkable happened. People stopped seeing her as Gordon Hartman's daughter. They started seeing her as Presley, the woman who kept showing up. Rain or sunshine, busy or exhausted, week after week. Maybe this is what purpose feels like. The thought came to her one evening while helping students complete scholarship applications. For the first time in a very long time, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. And somehow, that felt freeing. The work wasn't glamorous. There were no luxury parties. No magazine photos. No social status to gain. There were only real people with real needs. And real change happening one student at a time. The children trusted her first. Then the teachers. Then the parents. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It arrived slowly. Built through hundreds of small actions. Because trust is not something you demand. It is something you earn. One afternoon, Presley stood inside a renovated community center that volunteers had spent weeks painting. Laptops lined the tables. Books filled the shelves. Students laughed while working together. Looking around the room, she felt an emotion she couldn't quite describe. Pride. Not the kind she used to feel. Not pride in being admired. Not pride in being wealthy. A deeper kind of pride. The pride that comes from creating something meaningful. What could be more valuable than helping someone believe in their future? Months earlier, she had judged a man standing in a field. Now she spent her days helping young people build futures beyond those same fields. Without realizing it, she had become someone different. Not because she wanted Nolan Cruz to notice. Not because she wanted approval. But because she had finally learned the difference between looking successful and being valuable. And that lesson changed everything. Moral: true growth begins when serving others becomes more important than serving your own pride. 6 months had passed since Presley Hartman walked out of Nolan Cruz's office. 6 months since she admitted she was wrong. And 6 months since she made a promise to become someone different. The community center in Mill Haven was alive with energy. Students filled the room. Laptops sat open across long tables. Volunteers moved from group to group offering help. The walls that had once looked old and forgotten were now bright with color, hope, and possibility. Near the front of the room, Presley sat beside a teenage girl helping her revise a college application essay. The girl laughed at something Presley said. And Presley laughed too. It was a simple moment. But it was real. The kind of moment money could never buy. Then the front door opened. A cool breeze drifted inside. Several students glanced toward the entrance. Presley looked up. And froze. Standing quietly in the doorway was Nolan Cruz. For a second, neither of them moved. The noise of the room seemed to fade into the background. He actually came. The thought caught her completely by surprise. Nolan looked around slowly. He wasn't studying the building. He was studying the people. The students. The volunteers. The families. The lives being changed inside those walls. After a moment, Presley stood and walked toward him. "Hi," she said softly. The familiar calmness in his voice hadn't changed. Nolan glanced toward the students working at the tables. You built all this. Presley smiled gently. The community built it. I just helped. For a moment, Nolan said nothing. Then he walked farther inside. He stopped beside a table where several students were working through scholarship applications. Another group was practicing interview questions. Across the room, volunteers were helping younger children with reading assignments. Everywhere he looked, there was evidence of effort, consistency, commitment. Not a publicity event. Not a photo opportunity. Something real. Finally, Nolan turned back toward her. When I saw you at that wedding, he said quietly, I thought I knew exactly who you were. Presley nodded. That's fair. But I was wrong. Those 3 words hit her harder than she expected, because they were the same words she had once spoken to him. Nolan smiled slightly. What you've done here matters. For a moment, Presley couldn't speak. The approval she once would have desperately chased suddenly felt different. Because now it wasn't about impressing him. It was about being seen honestly. And that meant more. Over the following weeks, Nolan visited several more times. Sometimes they discussed programs. Sometimes they talked about students. Sometimes they simply sat together after long days and shared stories. There was no pressure. No games.
No pretending.
Just respect. The kind that grows slowly and lasts. As months passed, Nolan's company officially joined the initiative. Together they expanded into new counties. More community centers opened. More scholarships were created. More students received opportunities they had never imagined possible. What began as a business partnership became something much deeper. A shared purpose. A shared vision. And somewhere between meetings, road trips, community events, and countless conversations, a friendship quietly grew. The tension that once existed between them disappeared. In its place stood trust. One evening, as the sun set over the fields outside Mill Haven, Presley stood near the same road where she had first seen Nolan working months earlier. The fields looked exactly the same. The dirt roads hadn't changed. The farms hadn't changed. The town hadn't changed. But she had. And that made all the difference. What if the greatest transformation isn't changing your circumstances, but changing your heart? The young woman who once judged people by appearances was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that character is built through humility, kindness, and action. And Nolan understood something too. People deserve the chance to grow beyond their worst mistakes. Because sometimes the person who falls the farthest becomes the person who rises the highest. The field remained exactly where it had always been. But now, when Presley looked at it, she didn't see a farmer beneath her. She saw the place where her life began to change. Moral: true redemption happens when humility turns mistakes into meaningful action.